All right, so every time I hear one of these comments that you guys read in a news article that the universities want to replace seasoned staff with teenagers because the workers are complaining about extremely low pay. What does this tell you about our current society? Is that they view all workers, regardless of whether you're 20, whether you're 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. In the mind of the corporation, all you deserve is the minimum wage or you become free labor. The idea of paying living wages or wages in which people can afford families is become so alien to them. It is one of the main reasons I've created these voiceovers with a random AI head and have it talk because they can only go for a minute. If I could do the whole video with the talking random head, I would. But it's not feasible. So it takes a lot of processing power in order to create these too. So I'm not sure how much one of these recordings cost, but that's what's actually just said the first minute of this video. So without further ado, let's get into our opening monologue. So here we are, universities, corporations, and every other McJob in between, bowing down to the cult of replaceability. Fire the staff, hire the teens, and pray nobody notices the system collapsing like a Walmart shelf in hurricane season. The punchline, they call it efficiency, but it's really desperation dressed up as strategy. If you're going to hire someone that cares about as much about their job as they do picking their nose, then you have a real problem. Because if those people were really capable of doing that job, I would be concerned because that would mean that a smoking chimp could do that job. And I've worked a lot of very crappy jobs throughout my entire life in retail, restaurant. And sure, you don't have the brightest bulbs wandering around. You have people who will, and I want to believe it's an accident. They want to know what happens if you stick your hand into the fryolator. Like you have to experience that in order to know that it's dangerous. The same kind of people who will stick their fingers into an electrical socket just to make certain that it's working. In fact, a couple of years ago, I had some of these space cadets show up at McDonald's, and they were moving some panels out of the work area. And one of these guys decided to stick his hand into an outlet without noticing that it was back there. The guy jumped back so hard that he would never do that again. In fact, he kept saying that he was going to pass out. I don't know what it feels like to get truly electrocuted before. The only time I've ever had a little bit of electricity pass through me is when I was picking up a computer and I reached back to pick it up and I hadn't unplugged it and I got like a little zap from the power cord, and then I quickly pulled it out, and that was enough electricity for me. But there are those individuals out there that just don't learn until something really bad happens to them. In fact, I see this every day when I see a young kid driving a car that they can't afford down the street. And even though you look over and you see that we have these surveillance cameras everywhere in the city. You can't go more than a couple miles without seeing that gray box that says Tempe enforcement, speed enforcement bots. They're literally little gray towers that monitor speed going both ways. And this way, the cops have more time to spend eating donuts and having glazed over eyes. Who knows? But they're everywhere, and you still have people driving like maniacs thinking nobody's watching because the cops are not right there. All right, let's get into talking point number one. Only in corporate clown world do they think that firing experienced staff and hiring teenagers is a plan. Teens can't even survive a shift working in a restaurant without rage quitting. But sure, let's put them in charge of the federal financial aid system. That's not workforce strategy. That's child labor fan fiction with the side of unpaid overtime. If you've ever worked with teenagers anywhere, and sadly, when I was working at Kroger's pushing shopping carts, the whole bottom half of the store is high school kids. And these kids either don't show up, don't need money, or don't give a hoot. Or like my friend Stacy, the only reason she had to work at Kroger's was because her mom worked in the corporate office and her mom wanted her to work at the grocery store and work her way up to the top. Well, she may have lasted a couple of shifts, but there's no way she was going to stay there and act like a Kroger's worker, act like a brain dead piece of crap that doesn't care. I mean, it's become so easy to five finger discount things from the grocery store because your employees are completely disconnected. Now, imagine taking that same personality, 16, 17-year-old, and putting them in charge of something that a university staff member is taking care of, and you hand that responsibility to a teenager. May God save us all because they truly just don't care. And the reason for that is if you don't have true responsibility in this country, why would you care? If the man isn't waking you up every morning, letting you know that you need to get to work because you got a car payment that's due at the end of the week, you're not going to do it. And when it comes to responsibility, the people with the most responsibility typically have the most to lose by not going to work. Teens, on the opposite, they just want to have fun. They just want to get it on behind the Taco Bell and, and believe that no one has any crotch Krispies. I'll be fine. And then the next morning, you've got the itch that never goes away. Talking point number 2. Bosses love to preach that they're all replaceable. But funny how it's never their six-figure gig on the chopping block. If a staff worker wants a raise, suddenly a 16-year-old Fortnite addict is their replacement. Replaceability isn't an economic truth. It's a corporate gaslighting dressed up as efficiency. Well, if you want to put a kid that's video game addicted in charge of, let's say, your accounting department, and then wonder why there's no one there sitting in that chair, go for it. Young people have better things to do than to sell their souls to the SoulSuck 3000. They're going to take the SoulSuck 3000's little vacuum cleaner that you plug into your rear end when you sit down in corporate America, and they're going to think, I don't think so, corporate America. Corporate America, I know what's up. That's the great thing about Gen Zs. They all think that they know what's up, that they can beat the system that was designed to beat their parents. And to an extent, it did beat their parents, but at least their parents got to grow up in a time where a paycheck actually bought you a value meal at the McDonald's you work at. When you're working in a place and the CEO acknowledges that their lower level society can no longer afford an egg McMuffin, you've got problems. Now, imagine tossing in the people who can't afford McMuffins at the same wages into a job of responsibility. We've all seen what a mushroom cloud looks like. That's what corporate America wants to do. Because for the longest time, the pay in this country has not matched any sort of ability to make a living with those bottom level wages. And what corporate America wants is even cheaper labor. When they started rounding up all the people that were doing the farm jobs and the crap job at the bottom, it was simple. They needed to find people who didn't have a voice and for the rest of society to consider them to be invisible. When was the last time you met a migrant farmer? Hell, I come from migrant farmers. Since I've been an adult, I have never met someone who does that for a living. Do you know why? Because we travel in different circles. I work at the corporate McDonald's. They work in the fields with other people like them. So when you think about replacing them, someone who's okay with being invisible, someone who's being put into a toxic environment, and someone who doesn't require a whole lot of pay or shelter. Well, In order to be able to put children into these jobs at universities, those children are going to have someone who's going to pay their bills. So, again, it comes down to corporate welfare. They don't want to pay for adults because adults have needs. So you go to the lower tier of your labor in your society. But there's one thing that teen needs: their parents' money. So, in a sense, what you're doing is you're passing on the cost of housing, transportation, and food onto their parents while you use their kids as slave labor at the universities or wherever you're planning on hiring unreliable people who don't care about work. Because that's one thing the corporation can't stand. When their workers show up and there's a lack of loyalty or motivation to work like the owner, for some reason, the people at the very top think that everyone has the same motivations as they do. Well, let me give you this reality check, corporate America. The lower the wages, the lower the involvement. When I worked at Walmart, they had this stupid expression that I've been using on this channel for years: maximum effort, minimum wages. Now, how's that working out for you? So, the people who have no, how do I put this? They don't have a horse in the race, right? They don't care. I mean, if your boss walks in every single day and he tells you he can replace you just like that, how valuable is that job to him? Because there's one thing that the higher ups really don't like about having to be at work, and that's the training of new workers. In fact, they've designed entire departments to train their workers, especially when it comes to stupid things like cold calls or how to work the fryolator. I imagine that the fryolator, at least at other McDonald's, has some basic instructions over it, probably a sticker with a little thing that's supposed to represent you that tells you how to put the net in the fryolator so that it actually works. Because you wouldn't believe the things that I have seen at work where people walk in, they have very little training, they sit down, and they're completely worthless. And that's who corporate America wants to run their corporations for as little money as possible. There's a reason why most job descriptions for any entry level require 3 to 5 years of experience. They want someone else to train you. So that way, if you're good, they'll keep you. If you're not good, well, you're not going to make it to the end of the day. And for most of these people that start these jobs, and I've seen it myself, when people who don't care, especially teenagers or Gen Z, aren't treated with respect, and that I mean personal respect, you have absolutely no respect for these workers, and then you wonder why they behave in the way that they do, which comes back to the classic act your wage, wagey. And when you act your wage and your boss looks at you like, well, I expected you to have the maturity of a 50-year-old man, but I was expecting to pay you like an 8-year-old child. The disconnect to them isn't real. To them, they think, well, if I'm paying you anything, you expect 100% loyalty, 110% worker output performance wise, and then you're always disappointed with the livestock that you keep bringing in, right? I saw this when I worked at Kroger's almost every day. The hiring manager would find someone who submitted an application probably months ago. They'd bring them in, and the moment that they saw how they worked, they were extremely upset. It's like, and I've heard this myself. I gave you this great opportunity to take this amazing job, and you don't care. And you're like, well, this great opportunity comes with a paycheck that couldn't support cockroaches for a week. And then you wonder, it's like, do you really think you can replace everyone in this store with someone who doesn't need money? That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. What they want to do is replace current workers with people who don't need money. Now, in their twisted minds and in the twisted world that they live, those people are everywhere. Desperation workers are every person that needs a job right now. But the reality of that is you hire desperation workers, they work like desperation workers, and you're losing money because now you're having to cycle through all of your local losers because you can only have so many ghouls that are willing to take those jobs within walking distance of that place. Because if you think your workers are going to have the basics like nice clothes, soft skills, and customer service of any kind, I mean, the customer service that we've gotten after the bug has been abysmal. And I feel like it's just progressively gotten worse because people don't feel good about living in a society where their quality of life has diminished and diminished and diminished to the point where here I am, a crazy guy on the internet telling you what's going on because you are still living in denial that this isn't real, that there's plenty of opportunity out there. And then you read a story where this is going on. You want to replace all your workers with the lowest common denominator within our society. A person who couldn't handle the responsibility of taking a dump without needing you to come help them wipe up the mess afterwards. All right, let's get into our final talking point. Imagine paying a $40,000 a year to have your degree paperwork processed by someone who still asks their mom for gas money. Universities already feel like broken vending machines, and now they want to run them on dollar store labor. You're not getting an education. You're funding the world's most expensive babysitting service. I felt this at nearly every single job, at every age level that I have had to interact with throughout my entire working life. The base level jobs in our society are care facilities for adult children. And that's why they don't see any value in them. Your adult children arrive at 8 a.m. By 12 a.m., you've had to put half of them into timeout, and the other half, you don't know where they are because they've wandered off. I experience this all the time. It's like missing time. It's like, oh, where's Bob? And it's like, oh, Bob probably is in his car sleeping. That's the number one factor that I know when people aren't going to stay working at McDonald's. They have to sleep in their car because they need to unplug, or they're too tired because they had to work their driving job till 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you force them to get up and be at work before 8, which isn't going to happen. At my current job, I see people not within my area, but within the other parts of the building. I see the MIC workers show up whenever they feel like it. In fact, the other day I had a MIC worker come over and start chit-chatting with me because she just wasn't interested in the fry-later today. She was more interested in having a good time than being a good potato. And sometimes when you're a good potato, you know what's going to happen to you by the time you get to the end of the day, right? Just like working the fry-later works you. So you're going to start out a beautiful potato at 8 o'clock in the morning, but by the time you get to 5 o'clock, you are no longer that beautiful potato. You are overcooked French fries that are going to be thrown away because no red-blooded American would eat a French fry that looked that terrible. And that's the entire United States population of poor people. They look terrible. They smell terrible. They are terrible. And every day the cycle repeats itself at 8 o'clock in the morning, from good ripe potatoes to whatever that charred piece of crap is. That is what's going on in our society. And the quality of our life is diminishing in real time, and no one wants to talk about it.